What's up, folks? My name is Jeff Everhart from Knock, and we're here today with one of our product engineers to unpack a recent feature that we released around some upgrades to our workflow builder. So I have with me Kyle McDonald. And Kyle, you want to do a quick introduction?
Yeah, I'm Kyle. I'm a software engineer here at Knock, mostly focused on a front end stack and all that. I've been here for, God, coming up on a year now, which is
Yep,
crazy.
yep, it
Um,
is. Startup time flies.
yeah, yeah, it's always way, way, way faster. And when you look back, you're like, I don't feel like I've been here more than like a week. Yeah.
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 Well, cool. So this recent feature, we released some really big upgrades to our workflow builder, and that's obviously really at the core of Knox product. So why did we sort of decide to like tackle that as a project?
Yeah. So from what I understand, though I don't know like all the Knock lore and history, the workflow builder's kind of been what it is for a while in terms of like the underlying like mechanism of how things work. And it was very evident once I got in the code that it was like something that we just tacked on features to and didn't think about the entire system while we were building it, which is just like classic startup, like it happens. And
Hmm.
so um, the goal was to like make that foundation a lot better, so that way as we're scaling the company and scaling our product, those like inner workings and pipes were working like very well. So the other reason was like the workflow builder is our like core offering in the dashboard. That's like where people spend the most amount of time, and where we like continue to add more and more features. So it felt like um, it would be good to tackle the hardest part of the dashboard first and make that
Okay.
as good as possible. And then I think what we'll see over the next while is the same sort of improvements like being made across the rest of the dashboard as well.
Gotcha, gotcha. Yeah, I think the foundational piece is definitely true. And so like we'll back up a little bit, and I'd love to eventually get Krishna on here, who's our product designer. But I think like as a precursor to this upgrade, you and Krishna have been working for a while to implement and create our own internal design system called Telegraph. So like what benefits did you see that design system bringing to this project, and like what have been some of the challenges that y'all have faced like rolling that out to the team and like implementing it across the knock dashboard, right? Because the workflow builder is only one piece of that. I mean, obviously there are lots of screens, lots of interaction. So just what kind of background can you give us there?
Yeah, yeah. So we decided to build out the design system kind of after I landed here at Knock. It felt like a natural kind of next step. The cool thing to note about Telegraph is it's open source, so you can go to the
Okay.
Knock Labs GitHub and see all of it and use it if you want. Um, but the idea with the design system was like really like tightening kind of the design of like our dashboard and like whatever else we decided to use it on, because it was just kind of everywhere, right? There was no rules in place. It was
Mm,
like very loosey goosey, not consistent. And so the idea with Telegraph was like, how do we like make things way more consistent, provide the right amount of rails to make that happen without like limiting too much. So it's this constant like battle of flexibility and like rigidity when building something like that. Um, so yeah, so we set out to build that, and I think it's gone really well. We've rolled it out in quite a few places in the dashboard, which is nice, and you can definitely feel the difference when you're in a section that is like Telegraph and one that is not, which is cool. I think it's just like there's a little bit more attention to detail. We're really spending a lot of time making every little bit of Telegraph super well polished.
oh, that's
So yeah, and I
cool.
think the biggest unlock for like the team itself is it just helps us build faster, not only the dashboard, but other Telegraph components. If you look at the source code of Telegraph, it's like very like modular and like very like works on very small primitives. So similar to like how Radix would architect
Yeah,
their
that's what I was going to ask. Were there other
primitives.
component libraries y'all looked at as you sort of put this together?
Yeah, yeah. So for our base primitives, we kind of built ourselves, like our box, our stack, our text components, things like that. Like everything at its core is like a box component, which is really cool. And so things just build on top of that. So what that allows for is like a box can get padding set on it, margin set on it within the confines of the design system, and when using that for like a text component, you can use the box as a base, and then it just comes out of the box with all of that,
Hmm.
which is really, really cool. So we use Radix in a few spots. I'm sure we'll dip our toes in like React Aria and different things, just depending on like the use case of uh, kind of what we're building. But yeah,
Okay, cool. And I think the other benefit that I can just think of off the top of my head that you didn't mention was like how quickly we've scaled the engineering team. You know, it's more than doubled just alone in this year. And so I think
yeah,
about how to drive consistency with, that many people who are new to the code base, and introducing something like Telegraph where like everybody can sort of be on the same page about what to use where probably helps a lot. But that's really cool. So one of the things that we've used publicly when describing this workflow builder update is like performance.
mhm.
So like, what does that mean to you in the context of this application, and like, how did you go about tackling like performance with the workflow builder?
Yeah. So I think kind of the first bit of inspiration behind this was when Chris sent over a talk that Frame.io did at some conference, one of their people, about just like how fast their dashboard is, the animations, making sure that
Hmm.
everything's like 60 frames per second. The user shouldn't like wait for like a certain amount of time. So we did some of those sorts of things in the dashboard. So um, all of the updates, besides maybe like one or two, happen like instantly because we're optimistically updating kind of the data that's in our local cache, which is super, super useful, and like it makes everything just feel way snappier. Before, you would do an action and then there might be a loader, or there might not be a loader, and you're just kind of waiting for like something to happen. Um, the nice thing with the dashboard now is there's not really a need for spinners or loaders, because besides the initial
Hmm.
load, we're not really like reaching out to the backend for like information that we don't already have or can't like derive. Um, so yeah, we use like GraphQL with Apollo, which made like actually building this a lot easier than um, it could have been. So a lot of
Okay.
people use like Linear uses like a sync engine, which is super cool, and it helps for their use case with like local first and all that. We don't do that because we just there's not a reason for it. But it's like a similar idea where um, we have this local cache that we're updating and syncing with the server. So any action that we make updates the cache, and then goes to the server, reaches out, and we resync. And that's kind of the same pattern that's used throughout every kind of action in like the dashboard now.
Right. And with the you and I guess there was that use optimistic hook that it was introduced into React like fairly recently, right? Like within the last year, I think.
Yeah,
And right, what that assumes, just to sort of break it down to a simpler level, is like instead of making that network call, waiting for the response back to assume that the action was successful, was we just sort of show the end result, make that network call, and if it's not successful, then we might roll back, some of those user interface updates, right? How would you sort of
yeah,
maybe explain like optimistic updates at a
yeah,
more basic level?
yeah. So we don't use the use optimistic hook,
Okay.
which I don't think we can until like future versions of React and kind of
Oh,
just
okay.
where we're at.
Is that still in like
Um,
a release RC stage or something?
yeah, and I think like ideally, like we would only use it if we were implementing Apollo client ourselves. I think
Okay.
if Apollo were to implement that hook under the hood, that would be where it would happen.
Oh,
But it's the
interesting. So this
same.
is really something that's really tightly coupled to how we're using GraphQL.
Yeah, it's the same exact idea though, where we're updating it and we already have a value we derived, and we either like roll back, like you said, if there's an error, or just we assume success.
Hmm.
So if success
Hmm.
happens, then nothing on the UI really changes. So yeah,
Well, cool. Were there any particular like technical challenges you faced while implementing any of that?
yeah, yeah. So there's a lot of data that we're saving in the dashboard.
Oh,
A lot of
interesting.
different like in the workflow builder, a lot of different resources, a lot of different like data shapes, and like trying to provide a pattern of saving this without introducing a lot of complexity for each resource type was interesting. I think engineers tend to reach for like pulling data down from the back end, formatting it into what is works for the front end, and then sending it uh, back to what like the back end expects. But I think like one of the core things that makes this a lot easier is we design like the front end and what the components are expecting based on the back end data. So we're really
Okay.
all we're doing is mutating that data in place and then sending it back. We're not really like changing the structure or
Yeah, no
whatever it may be.
transformation step that needs to happen between the
Yeah,
component and GraphQL.
yeah. Which just allows us to use the same like save action for everything, right?
Okay. Oh,
There's a
nice.
few like one-off like logic that we may need to do just based on how like the backend like GraphQL mutation is set up, but it allows us not to have to think about it too much, and it also then allows for anybody who's using these like sort of workflow hooks really not to think about it because it just takes care of itself. So that just going that route, like it feels funky, it feels like dirty at first, but it
Yeah.
reduces so much complexity that you just don't have to deal with later. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, do you think we could take a look at a quick demo? If you want to open up the workflow builder and maybe just sort of walk us through like some of this performance work and I don't know,
Yeah.
show us
Yeah.
around. Because I know there are also some changes like that we made. So, right, this wasn't all under the hood stuff. As a part of updating the workflow builder, you all also sort of took a look at some of the user experience of
Mhm.
editing the individual steps. So, if there's anything you want to call out there, like that we've changed to make it easier, I think people would love to see that.
Yeah, yeah. So I will preface with there's still a lot more updates coming here. I think the idea with just how we phased the releases, we really wanted to focus like on the under the hood stuff as much as
Okay.
possible. And then anything that we could update visually that just wasn't a big time sink, we would do along the way, which ended up being a lot of stuff because Telegraph just made it very easy to
Yeah, I was
just
gonna say
drop
because
things in.
it looks very refreshed from what it was a few weeks ago to what it is now. Like it's
Yeah,
exciting to hear there's more coming, but it's like it already looks pretty great.
yeah, yeah. So I think everything besides maybe one or two smaller things on in the workflow builder now is all Telegraph,
Okay,
which is super cool.
cool.
So we have like our buttons, we have like our combo box over here, all of the like text and like everything, the colors, all Telegraph.
Hmm.
So kind of when you jump in here, it automatically just feels a little bit brighter, I think.
Yeah,
um,
definitely.
yeah. So what we I can just walk through like different things. So
Yeah, yeah.
uh, the like when you click on the trigger now, it happens instantly. Before we would reach out for a network request and like wait
Okay.
for that to resolve and display it. The cool thing is when you're actually changing URLs too, um,
Oh,
which is
nice.
makes it so you can deep link. And there's a lot of places you'll find where deep linking happens a lot easier in the workflow builder. Um, but the cool thing is like
Oh wow. So
really,
hold on, let's unpack that for a second because I feel like
yeah.
that's great as an application where like people will spend hours and like collaborate with each other. That seems like a super helpful feature to just have state in the URL. So like if I'm
Yeah.
setting, data on a particular like step, right? I can deep link somebody into a particular step. Does it work like that?
Yeah, which I wish I could show the URL.
Okay.
No, it won't
Well,
let me. But
yeah, we can assume
yeah,
for the
yeah,
purposes of the demo, we'll assume that it's truthful.
yeah. So the idea is like this. When you open this, this is stored in URL state. So if I
Okay.
like, if I don't navigate away, if I refresh the page, that's open
Oh,
again.
sweet.
Um, you'll like, I'm pretty sure here. I think I actually have to create a step. So if I do this and select a thing. Cool. If I hit commit and then refresh the page, like the commit modal is still there.
Okay. Oh, wow.
So just it makes there, like any kind of action that changes kind of what the page is looking like
Hmm.
is all in the real state, which I think is super cool. And I think like that's kind of the pattern that the React community has been leaning on.
Yeah, definitely
It's been
with
more of a
the new version
focus
of
now.
Next. So,
Yeah.
and is this
So
using the app router or are we still using the pages router?
This is still the Pages router. I think the
Okay.
next big undertaking would be migrating to the app router, but that's like a
Okay.
whole
Yeah.
ordeal. Yeah. But yeah, so uh, as you saw, kind of when I created um, the email step, it just showed up instantly, which is
Yep.
super cool. And then you can like select whatever channel. Um, See that like automatically go to Twilio because that's the only channel that I have set up in this environment
Okay.
for SMS. Um, and and yeah, and then you get cool things like keyboard shortcuts everywhere now. So if I want to delete this, I can just do Command Backspace, like which is
Wow.
kind of just a common keyboard
Okay.
shortcut for things like that. And you'll notice now if you mouse over like any sort of button in the
Mm-hmm.
dashboard, it'll show the keyboard shortcut. Now you can also open this and see every keyboard
Ooh.
shortcut that's available at the time. So the cool thing about this is it works in context. So you'll notice there's like these keyboard shortcuts here for like editing the template. Say I
Okay.
navigate away from here and reopen it. There's a lot less keyboard shortcuts because it
Oh.
looks at what's on the page and what's active right now and displays them accordingly. So you'll know that anything that's here you can actually run and it'll work. It won't just be like you'll be hitting a keyboard shortcut and nothing's happening.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that was a big add, and I think with like some of the other updates that we're bringing to like keyboard shortcuts and navigating like the graph view, like there's just you won't have to touch the mouse much, which is cool, and
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah. It
um,
is really nice. And
yeah,
especially for people who like tend to spend a lot of time in here, like it's definitely going to save them a lot of time. And I'll call out another thing that I like, and it's kind of a little thing, but like on the individual steps, there used to be, a bunch of actions hidden in one of those like three dot menus. I think
yeah,
delete was in there, maybe like edit
yeah. It was
metadata,
all
and we've bubbled that stuff up to the top of that step. So now like
yeah,
deletes its own action at the top level. And like that is I find really nice because it's a little bit more apparent. It's easier to get to. It like removes a click from my workflow if I want to delete, if I'm still using the mouse, that is.
yeah,
But the keyboard stuff is really interesting. And so like I remember one of the first features that you launched after coming to Knock was the command palette, the Command K menu.
yeah,
And so obviously now you're bringing a bunch of cool key bindings to the workflow editor.
yeah.
So like what? So I got a couple. Like let me do a couple questions at you. So like, why do you feel like
Sure.
these types of features are important for dev tools? And then like, what should other developers consider as they're building like key bindings or keyboard shortcuts for their own product?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think these are especially important for dev tools because I feel like engineers generally are more keyboard oriented. Like I use Vim bindings. I don't like to really touch the mouse if I don't have to. If I can figure out how to use the keyboard shortcuts in an application, like I'll be
Mm-hmm.
using that. The big thing that I've noticed, I can't think of any exact examples, but there's some people that do keyboard shortcuts really well, and there's some people that don't do them so well. And I think like the thing that we wanted to focus on with Doc and kind of the start of these like keyboard shortcuts is making things super consistent
Okay.
and making the keyboard shortcuts familiar. So like the delete command, like that's what you use to delete in like the Finder view in Mac and
Mm-hmm.
um, different things and like for like submitting it's Command Enter, which is a pretty common pattern for submitting and yeah, so like kind of how we like enforcing this consistency is by making it so that anytime you add a shortcut, you're calling the shortcut by name. So for this like delete, I'm calling the delete shortcut. For this, I'm calling the
Okay.
submit shortcut. Um, so that way, it's not like you're just ad hoc throwing a keyboard shortcut into a button or something like that. So this kind of enforces consistency. You have a dictionary of things that exist, and if it exists, use that. If it doesn't exist, then we should think about how we um, like name the keyboard shortcut, how we use it, and kind of what the actual key bindings are. So that's one of the things that when I was like implementing some of the like underlying hooks and stuff for these keyboard shortcuts, that it was very important, I think, to kind of get that right from the beginning.
Yeah, and it seems like you did a lot of sort of like ecosystem research at what other popular tools were using to like create
Yeah.
that familiar mapping
Hmm.
between, you know, what somebody might already be using in an adjacent product and what we're doing in the knock dashboard, which I think is really cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Is there any, this is a sort of just general question. Was there anything you looked at for inspiration in terms of other products as you approached this rebuild?
Yeah, there was a few that we looked at. I think Retool is always a good
Okay.
example to look at when it comes to just like we have all these variables over here. How should we display them in a way that makes sense? And there's going to be some more visual updates coming over here. But like that was one of the big ones. Linear is always a product we look at.
Mm-hmm.
I think they just have put a lot of thought into like very like minute things that wouldn't matter to most people, but when like put together over like an entire product, like do end up mattering. So I think
Mm-hmm.
kind of seeing how they approach keyboard shortcuts, the key bindings they use, what they call them, things like that was really important. And yeah, I think I'm trying to think if there was any other big ones. I think those are mostly the two that
Okay.
we kind of looked at. I mean, I think like at Knock, like we don't try to look at competitors or what they're doing as much when it
Mm-hmm.
comes to designing and building out our products. So I think for like that aspect, like how the workflow builder is presented and stuff, like this is how we imagine it and didn't really look too far elsewhere for it. But as far as just like the like best practices of like how things kind of are displayed, the Retool and Linear are two big ones.
Yeah, and it's looking great. So to wrap us up, is there anything else you'd like to share with the community about this project? Maybe tease some of the other updates that are coming to the workflow builder?
Yeah. So I think uh, with this project, like I've implemented similar things in the past when it comes to just um, like optimistic updates, things
Mm-hmm.
happening quickly, and sorry, and things happening
You're good.
quickly, and I've done it in a different way in the past using React Query, and that's worked really well. And it wasn't any more complicated than what we did here. I think Apollo made it even easier. But I
Oh,
think
really? Cool.
as like engineers, it's really easy to just like skip this step of optimistic updates. Like it's really easy to just go and build the thing, and then it
Mm-hmm.
responds from the server, and you throw a spinner in there, and then you're waiting. And it, like the user may or may not care, but they will like notice when things are they're instant,
Mm-hmm.
even if it's not like they outright notice. They're subconsciously noticing how quick the product is. So I think from the get go, when you're designing your like front end sort of data layer, like building this sort of stuff in is really important. And I think it's like an extra like 20% work added on top of the work you're already doing to kind of make this happen. So yeah, I just don't see many like early startups talk about this,
Yeah.
which I think is a big miss in terms of just like how easy like this is to implement with the libraries and stuff that
Oh,
exists right
okay.
now. Yeah,
Yeah, I definitely see your point there. Like I think a lot of people would have been like, "Well, the workflow builder's there. Like let's move on to what's the next feature?" Instead
yeah,
of really saying, you know, how can we level this up even by 20%? Because like when
yeah,
you think about something like that in the aggregate, right? Maybe it's, you know, 500 milliseconds or something like every round trip and every spinner we show for 500 milliseconds. Like in the aggregate, when you have a lot of users, like that's a lot of time that somebody's seeing a spinner. And if you can make it feel more pleasant to use, especially when it's something that's like core to another developer or product team doing their job, right? Which is ultimately what
yeah,
knock is, you know, if somebody's using this software to do their job, like, you know, the
yeah,
faster, more responsive we can make that, I think the better, you know, like reaction people are going to have to it. And definitely when you look at some of those tools that you named that we look at, you know, often for inspiration, like that's definitely the approach they're taking. So it's cool to hear you say that as well.
yeah,
Well, cool.
yeah.
Kyle, you got anything else you want to leave us with?
Um, I guess the last piece of kind of what I was getting at is once you do implement something like this, everything else is going to feel slow. So I've already had a few
I
instances where
can
there
see
is
that.
something not optimistically loading in the dashboard, and I've gotten feedback like, "Oh, this is way too slow here," and
Yeah.
it's funny to be like, "That's just how everything was before." So
Oh,
um,
wow.
it's really transformational, like how this kind of work is helping the dashboard and just as we build on top of it, not having to worry about that piece too much anymore, I think is going to be really big for us. Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. That's really interesting. Well, cool, Kyle. Thank you so much for joining me here. I appreciate your time and insight into the work it took to ship these updates to the Workflow Builder. If you're watching on social media or YouTube and you haven't been in the Workflow Builder in a while, go in, check it out. It's definitely a night and day difference. Kyle's done some excellent work to just make that thing super performant, and the visual upgrades using Telegraph, in my opinion, are just chef's kiss. So, as always, thanks for watching and knock on.